Welcome everyone. I'm Rodney Dawson, Curator of Education here at the Greensboro History Museum, and today I'm having the pleasure to talk about something I grew up watching. The history of the Aggie-Eagle Classic is more than just a game. And first off, I'd like to talk about a lot of folks that put some time and effort into making this happen. This is kind of a collaboration, so if you travel to the North Carolina Museum of History in Durham, is that the
Well, in Durham, it is called the Durham History Museum.
Durham History Museum, collaborated with North Carolina Central University. Of course, we here at Greensboro History Museum collaborating with North Carolina A&T State University. Full disclosure, I'm an Aggie. However, we're chronicling and commemorating all the events and the stories and just the game and the people that surround it. I want to talk about the history of it. This museum was founded in 1924. And my research tells me that the first game in the series was in 1924, and it was a 13-13 tie. And now the series, let me make sure I'm right, as of I think it was September 21, 2021, 53, 34, and 5, with A&T holding the 53. So Central's going to play some catch up for us.
We got to play some catch up.
But I talked about our panelists here. We have some wonderful panelists here. I'm glad you traveled from Durham. You traveled over from North Carolina A&T. But like I mentioned before, there's more than just the three of us that made this happen. I hate to mention names like you alluded to earlier. You're going to leave someone out. But I do want to say that I want to thank Dr. Baker, whom I met yesterday. Turned out to be a fraternity brother of mine. Craig Thompson, also Professor Yvonne DeHaith. James Stewart over at the library at North Carolina A&T. Edwin Moyer, journalism and mass communications. Saman Goodman, my intern, who's also in that same program. Glenn Perkins here at the museum, as well as Spencer Gwynn, along with the late Mel Swan, who called for over 40 years worth of games. And so countless A&T versus Central games that these gentlemen called. I was in communication with Spencer Gwynn, who's retired now, 89 years old, but he gave me some old CDs that we play out in our display. And then also university relations over at A&T, and all of our wonderful interviewees that we've spoken to. And speaking of the display, it's in our Community Voices display here at the Greensboro History Museum, right in the front lobby. Please come by and visit 130 Summit Avenue, and you'll be able to see for yourself the display between the history of the Aggie-Eagle Classic. And with that being said, I'd also like to say thank you to our panelists here, Dr. Charles Johnson from North Carolina Central University, as well as Dr. Arwin Smallwood over at North Carolina A&T. You're the chair of the Political Science and History Department at North Carolina A&T?
I am, yes.
And how long have you been at that position?
Well, the chair originally of the Department of History, and then Department of A&T, but altogether 8 years.
8 years?
Yeah.
And Dr. Johnson, your position over at North Carolina Central?
I'm an assistant professor of history and a director of the public history program at North Carolina Central.
We need about 30 minutes to read both your bios. You were a summer intern over at the State Department, correct?
That's absolutely right.
Off mic, or give me 30 seconds. How was that?
Fantastic. One of the things that I took away from that was just how much information the government actually has about the different nations that we have relationships with. So I was in Maseru in Lesotho, and what I learned is that my role there really was to help to gather information about different things that were important to the United States government as it related to child labor practices and that kind of thing.
Okay.
When I was there. But it was very useful also as a historian, because I spent maybe a year working in Record Group 59, which is a State Department records, when I returned. And just going through all of those records, you get a real sense. I mean, they would say, it's Robert, what's your last name?
Dawson.
Robert Dawson stopped by the office today, and they'd have a description of you, what you look like, an assessment of just how sharp they thought you were, and anything that related to whatever interest they had at that time,
Okay.
Where I was, we were dealing a lot, again, with child labor practices. Great experience. I'm still in touch with many of the people that I work with there.
Good stuff, good stuff. Now, I'm not going to read your entire bio, but it says you're tech-savvy, full-time historian of the worldwide presence of African-descended peoples. What does that mean?
Well, my interest has been looking at how we can heal the African diaspora, right? So I did my PhD at Howard University under Dr. Joseph Harris, who was a preeminent scholar of the African diaspora. And as a country boy growing up in Durham, North Carolina, I don't think I had a real sense of sort of the global presence of people of African descent. And I've looked at how can we build ties that will help us to rebuild our communities and to heal and to empower ourselves and empower our communities and that kind of thing. So specifically, I looked at the roles that African Americans played in the anti-apartheid movement, and came to find that there were long-standing relations. One name, for example, is Orpheus McAdoo, and if you know anything about the McAdoo family, that's a Greensboro name, like Bob McAdoo. He is a relative of Orpheus McAdoo, but Orpheus McAdoo took a group of college singers to South Africa in the 1880s, and they sang spirituals, Negro spirituals, and that kind of thing that had a tremendous impact on music in South Africa. But I mean, all of that was fascinating to me, learning that and then trying to make the connections between communities, building bridges and that kind of thing.
Great, great. Do you see what you're doing now with this Aggie-Eagle display? Do you see that as furthering that cause?
Absolutely. I think one of the interesting aspects of this rivalry is the close relationship between the institutions. And a lot of that is born out of the fact that the young people are coming out of the same high schools. They know each other well. They come out of the same communities. And it's true for the players. I mean, guys that played at Durham Hillside went to both North Carolina College or North Carolina Central and also the North Carolina A&T, And that closeness of it, that fuels the rivalry, obviously,
Right.
But it also means, to me, just looking at some of the other rivalries, looking at Grambling and Southerns and some of the others that are in the SWAC that are similar, where ours differs though, and people have mentioned this to me, is how well Eagles and Aggies get along, up until game time,
Right.
But before and after the game, we get along just fine.
Yeah, they're fine.
Yeah, so.
And that's another exploration, looking at the Hillside and James B. Dudley. A couple other schools, but those are the two that come to mind. And Dr. Smallwood, you travel just up the road here, and you said you've been at North Carolina A&T for 8 years, and you're the professor and chair of the Department of History and Political Science in Aggie land. And you also went to The Ohio State University?
Oh yeah, well yes.
So you know a little something about football in the Midwest as well. Are you upset that they didn't make the Final Four?
Oh well, anytime the team up north beats you, you're not pleased about that, and
Right.
they knock you out. So that's that's going to be.
You refuse to call the name? You won't say the name? You just say the
Buckeye
team up
Nation.
Navy? He wouldn't say Michigan. He said the team up north. Okay.
But I will say, since you broached that question, that is part of the interest. Dr. Johnson and I, in collaborating on this project, both having attended North Carolina, because I am an alum of North Carolina
Right.
Central, understood and grew up with this rivalry in terms of the importance of it to both cities and both communities. And then going to a place like Columbus and getting involved with that, that rivalry in terms of the interest between Ohio State and the team up north.
Right.
Really kind of, there are these similarities and yet these differences. And it's one of the things that really kind of helped to fuel me and my interest in promoting and talking about and documenting and working with Dr. Johnson to document this noted and famed rivalry.
Okay. Well, let's get into some questions.
Sure.
And as I'm asking them, you can shoot back and forth, interject when you will, or
Okay.
when you wish to. But like I mentioned before, it's nearly 100 years old. 2024 will reach 100 years.
Well, actually, we discovered a game over the summer doing research that we played in 1922
Okay.
up here in Greensboro. So North Carolina Central has gone through a number of name changes over the years, and The name changed from the National Religious Training School in Chautauqua to the National Training School in 1915. And it remained that through up to 1923. But in 1922, the National Training School came up here and played A&T, and the Aggies won that 26-0.
26-0.
26-0.
And y'all help me out on time, but the first name you mentioned, I remember reading and I saw that first name, Chautauqua. Is that why that name?
Well, when so the founder of North Carolina Central was James Edward Shepard, and we was established in 1910. And Dr. Shepard was one of the major challenges that we have as a people, and this is a period to contextualize this. Rayford Logan, the eminent historian of African American experience, said this was the nadir, this period we're talking about for black people, 1865 to about 1912. So Central North Carolina, what's North Carolina Central today, was founded in 1910. We had very real problems of literacy and also with our religious leaders. So, you know, the Chautauqua movement was one where you were having religious meetings and gatherings outdoors and so forth. And North Carolina College ends up, it emerges out of that. So, but there are many schools, as you well know, that kind of started from with a religious background.
Right.
Shaw is, you know, similar.
Yeah, same here at Bennett College for Women. So with that being said, we know A&T started in 1891. And so with A&T getting a 30-year jump, nearly a 30-year jump on Central, did that contribute? We talked about pulling from the same pool of players. What about the foundation? What else contributed to the specialness of the rivalry, Dr. Smallwood?
Well, I actually think that that what really intensified the rivalry, you know, we had that first game, and I think Central and A&T both prided themselves on being significant institutions in the state. Obviously, A&T being older and basically the big brother, you know, to North Carolina Central. But the year after that first game in 1922, they did not play, and A&T was crowned, you know, the best team in North Carolina. Now, I'm sure that helped in some way to fuel this rivalry, because I'm sure at North Carolina Central, you know, how can you be the best team in North Carolina and they did not play that year? You know, how can you be crowned the best team? And so then the following year, of course, we started, it picks up again and we see them playing again. And then your rivalries are always about coaches, and you brought up at the start about Ohio State, and we have to talk about Woody Hayes and, you know, the different coaches. Coaches can really
You won't even say the coach's name.
I saw it.
But coaches fuel these rivalries. You know, coaches can fuel these rivalries, and I think that you know that's kind of more of it than the old history of A&T. Although I do believe that when Central was founded, it was founded as a private institution, and it was founded by, you know, again, we know that Durham had more black millionaires than anywhere else in the country after Tulsa and the Tulsa race riot. I mean, Durham stood out. So we talk about North Carolina Mutual Life and the black middle and upper class in Durham, and that school, Central, being basically a private elite school, it kind of gets into your Duke, Carolina, into your Auburn, Alabama type rivalries, right? That you got this kind of private elite group, and then you got a state school, which is, you know, really servicing kind of a farming community. So you have that classic clash between agricultural and technical, and then, you know, the liberal arts, you know, philosophy and history and law. And so that's what I would say, kind of how we see things going, and that kind of feeds into the rivalry to me. You know?
It does. Go ahead.
I wanted to comment on that, because I absolutely agree with Smallwood. I think understanding the context is really important. So these schools are like the other HBCUs, are fighting for an identity, you know, and fielding. It's not like today. People have to remember how important these games were, because it was like the main attraction when the football teams played, and then when A&T and North Carolina College played, that was a huge deal, even back then, because it was one of the main forms of entertainment. Was it a recruiting tool as well? It was a really important recruiting tool for both institutions in terms of, you clearly speaking beyond the gridiron. Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, if you look at here recently, North Carolina Central went on a run where we won 3 in a row, in fact, against A&T in 2014, 15, 16, and won the MEAC in those years, and the enrollment, you know, went through the roof. And North Carolina A&T here has been, one of the most dominant HBCUs in football this last decade. And you look at where A&T, how it's doing, and you don't want to put it all just on football, but it does matter. And I think A&T has been very intentional about using that. You know, my son took a tour of A&T about a month ago. He's interested in being an engineer, and he's got like one application. I'm trying to get him to fill out more than one application, man. But he's set on being an Aggie.
Smart man.
But yeah, how about that? But but the tour guide was outstanding. It was an outstanding tour, and she included that though. She talked about the football team and what it means at A&T and the esprit de corps that comes out of that. But before you go on, I just want to mention, A&T's first coach was really outstanding. His name was Lonnie Byarm. And Byarm studied with some of the great coaches from the historically white institutions of that period. So he studied with Newt Rodney at Notre Dame, who was an end who emphasized the forward pass. He studied with Robert Zupke, who was at Illinois, the guy who established the huddle. He studied with Pop Warner, who came up with the three-point stance. I mean, so he was really an outstanding coach, and he was at A&T during that 1920s period. And I think that's why they had so much success. That 1927 Aggie team was, to me, during that period, one of the best, that came out of the state. They won the CIAA that year and had one loss to the eventual national title-winning Bluefield State team. They lost down in Winston-Salem. But A&T turned around and hired their coach in 1930. So hired Big Jeff Jefferson, so yeah.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Coach Byarm, because in the display, the Community Voices display here at the Greensboro History Museum, we do have a picture of Coach Byarm from 1919. So we represent the coaches from 1919 to the present. So that's noted. And I want to ask you, and then I'll come back. I know growing up, I don't want to date myself, but I remember the Ben Bay. And then I remember the Budweiser Superfest. And I would compare the two. All right, this one's better than that one, therefore A&T is better than Central. And in essence, it wasn't. It's just, so I already had an allegiance to A&T because of proximity, I would say. But I got a feel for the school. Like, A&T is my school, and then if I went to Durham for anything, I felt I was in Central Territory. I could be going to Durham and go to the store, and I felt I was in Central Territory. But that's the allegiance and the connection I had to the school. So in your eyes, as a faculty member, as a resident here, coming from another part of the state, how do you feel the A&T community views Central?
Well, and I'm glad you said that, coming from another part of the state, and then building on what Dr. Johnson just said. One of the ways I found out how really generational the rivalry was through my father-in-law, who was a professor at North Carolina Central, and I dated his daughter while I was there, and we married. And he would sit around the table and talk about how they played the Turkey Classic when he was a kid, and how he grew up in Thomasville, and that when the game was played, you could tell when it was in Greensboro, because downtown Thomasville, the black district in Thomasville, was empty because everybody was in Greensboro. And then you knew when it was in Durham because they would be in town. The point is that you got to understand it's a statewide rivalry. It's not a Durham or just a Durham-Greensboro rivalry. It's a statewide rivalry. And even down home where I'm from in eastern North Carolina, remember that's where your majority of black farmers are, in eastern North Carolina and in northeastern North Carolina. And so you got generations of Aggies, who 4 or 5 generations who farmed those lands in Bertie, Northampton, Gates, Hertford County, Halifax, and they've sent their kids here to be educated and then come back and run the farm. So it was a statewide rivalry. And then the others, people who ended up in the professional law and medicine, and some of whom were the children of farmers still, went to North Carolina Central. And so the rivalry, is statewide.
Right.
So coming here, and as a student who attended North Carolina Central, and my brother is Aggie, he graduated from North Carolina A&T. I mean, we're family until the day of the game. And then, like I said, again, we're picking sides. I would say that the thing as a Central person that it was at least it's across the board, both here and there. When you talk to students, in our program in political science who are thinking about going to law school, they're like, oh, I've got to go to Central. I mean, there are places they can go and they'll think about going to Central's law school, but their rivalry is still there.
Right.
They still have a tinge of it. And what we always say is, no, we're sister institutions. It's a great school to go to graduate school or go to law school, but it's so ingrained in the students, about the rivalry that still, there's that, do I really have to go, kind of thing, that they don't want to do. So I would say that, yeah, it's definitely it's a rivalry that it goes beyond just the campuses and just beyond the states. I do believe that A&T has the big brother kind of syndrome, that they sometimes see, the Central as being the younger institution and they're the older institution. But again, some of that, is deflected by the nature of the campus and the history, like I said again, of I still feel Central has a very private feel to it. You can see it in the architecture of the campus, you can see it in the layout of the campus, and if you talk to old timers, you still have that feel of like a private institution, even though it's a state-supported institution. And I think that still also fuels, some of that competition between the two campuses.
Yeah, and we were the first, the state-supported HBCU liberal arts institution.
Okay.
North Carolina Central. And by way of introduction, I was born and raised in Durham. So I can really speak to what Dr. Smallwood is saying. I would add, I think he covered that really well. Aggies and Eagles, so for people who might not know, we compete in everything, right? So not just football. I mean, it's everything. And we interviewed a number of alumni, also football players and folks who attended the institution. And I interviewed a couple, Quan Williams, who was an Eagle, and his wife, Tate Williams, who was on the board of trustees at one time at A&T, to talk about what their household looked like, being Eagles and Aggies married, and they wanted to make sure, that I emphasized the fact that the rivalry doesn't just happen in football, man. It goes on all the time, But it's a healthy thing, because I think we carry that over in life, right? And we keep that competitive spirit and so forth. And I'd like to think that we pick on each other, but I don't know that we would allow anybody else to.
Exactly. And we be there for you. They needed you.
Exactly.
And that if you watch the video more than just the game, some of the players mentioned that very thing. I think it was Dexter Feaster, who came from the eastern part of the state, and how that game meant something to him because it was the only game his family could make it to when they played in Central.
Okay.
Because it was closer for his family to make it. And he said, so it wasn't a rivalry for him, it was the ability that his mother and his family would see him playing like my boy made it to college. And he saw the smile on his mom's face. So those are the stories you get, when you talk to people. So, it ties into what you talked about. I was gonna ask you, but you kind of answered it about how, unless you think you didn't, Central views A&T, North Carolina Central views A&T.
I think it's similar to how Dr. Smallwood said. I mean, you go down to individuals, it can be, but I think generally we see each other as brother and sister institution.
Coach Broadway, did he coach at Central?
He did.
Okay, so I know Coach Broadway. We have Coach Hayes, and probably a couple more in there. So we have
Washington.
Okay.
Your current coach was the defensive coordinator at North Carolina Central in the 90s.
Okay. So we have a lot of that going on, but you talked about how the coaches kind of really shape this thing, and I had some names here. Coach Riddick, Broadway, Coach Hayes, who resonates with me. He was when I was coming up, he was the name. Coach Pickett and several others. Talk to us, and either one you can jump in about some of the coaches that left an imprint that you know about.
Yeah, so I would say one of the early coaches, one of our earliest coaches, the earliest one that coached in the rivalry was Wilson Bashan Eagleson, and he was a good Kappa brother of ours.
Oh, okay.
And he had attended Indiana University, and he coached the Eagles from 1922 to 1926. And then he came over. He was the first coach to switch sidelines. So he coached at North Carolina A&T in in 1930. Really outstanding coaches in this rivalry. Harry Jefferson, Big Jeff Jefferson, you know, he had won 2 national titles when A&T got him to come here in 1930.
Okay.
He had won at Bluefield, but he couldn't beat the Eagles.
Where's Bluefield? Is that West Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay.
But he couldn't beat the
Couldn't
Eagles,
beat the
man, so he didn't last very long
Right.
at A&T. You know, he went on up to Virginia State. You know, but there have been some great ones. We cover in our exhibit down in Durham on the A&T side. Bill Bell, who played at Ohio State, was an outstanding tackle for Ohio State University and do it a lot. You know, Dr. Bill Bell, very outstanding coach and just leader, period. Burke Pickett is another one. Burke Pickett had actually played for Bill Bell when Bill Bell coached the Army Airfield team at Tuskegee, the Warhawks in the 40s, and then Hornsby Howe. All of these guys, and we covered them because they were title winners, you know, CIAA championships. I could talk about that, man.
Right.
You know, I don't know what we're on time, but I'll just say, and I got to share this because in '58, the Eagles had. You know, these are the best of the best high school players. So remember, when we're talking about that, before, especially before 1960, truthfully before 1970, the best of the best players were at North Carolina A&T and North Carolina Central. They were young men from North Carolina, right? E. Smith and Atkins and Hillside and Dudley and the other black high schools were feeding these schools, and they were the best players. Well, when they met in 1958, it was a huge game. Both of those teams were either one-loss teams or undefeated teams, maybe even undefeated. And even number years were played down in Durham, right? So Burke Pickett brought the Aggies to Durham, and the AD wanted to move that game because it was going to be a huge. This was going to determine the CIAA title, you know. So he wanted to move the game.
What kind of crowd was he
It was huge, and it was. And
like 10,000, or you know?
Yeah, probably that or in excess, which at that time, you know, was a really large, considered a huge crowd. Well, North Carolina Central hadn't lost at home since 1953, right? So the students lost it, right? So you get the administration thinking about the dollars, you got the students trying to win the game, and it didn't matter. They had it at home, and A&T came and snuck away with one. Down at North Carolina Central and won the CIAA from that thing, man. You know, but really great coaches. Burke Pickett was, you know, outstanding. Hornsby Howe, you mentioned Bill Hayes. Bill Hayes won more games in the rivalry than any coach. You know, he beat his alma mater. I want to curse when I say this, but I'm gonna keep it clean. 12 times, you know. So I mean, he was a heck of a coach. Man. He was outstanding when he was at Winston-Salem State. He was the first black coach in the ACC, and he was an outstanding football player also. You know,
I didn't know that.
And Broadway, real quick, won national title at North Carolina Central, at Grambling, and at A&T, and all of them. You know, I had a chance to talk to each of them. They have very fond memories of both institutions, and they had a lot to say about that rivalry. Nothing quite like it.
Dr. Smallwood, what does it mean to be a head coach, career-wise? I'm jumping ahead here, but what does it mean to be a head coach for North Carolina Central or for North Carolina A&T? Is it a career-ending position, or you know, you can stop?
Well, that's a difficult question for me. I mean, it's best asked of the coaches, in terms of how they, feel about it. I think Dr. Johnson's already gave a great example of how certainly, the success of the coaches at either school can, put them on a trajectory, between the schools. But I think that what I was listening as he, explained, how this cross-pollination, and I can't remember who coined the term, whether it was he and I talking or someone else, but iron sharpening iron. But the fact that we had that degree of competition and respect, mutual respect for each other. So, you can, he just outlined an example of where a coach lost his job from not being able to beat North Carolina Central. So I do believe it matters, but you also, we've seen situations where, we can have a very successful coach who continues, to win. So it's one of those things you have to talk with the coaches about, and they can give you an insight that I think that we, as scholars looking at it from the outside, we can speculate on, but they can give you insight in terms of the pressure that they're under, when they're, in that rivalry, and depending on, where they are in terms of their wins versus losses.
And I'm glad you said that. And I want to talk about, just briefly talk about the environments, where you play, what it sounded like, what it looked like. Of course, now they play at, BB&T Stadium at North Carolina A&T, and at Central is...
It's O'Kelly Ridge Stadium.
Okay. Back in the day, they used to play at the War Memorial Stadium, used to be the baseball stadium here. And I saw video
Durham
clips.
Athletic Park.
Okay, Durham Athletic. And when I saw the old clips, I saw hundreds of people. You had the field, but immediately adjacent to the field is the parking lot, if you can call it that. But it was a dirt parking lot. At least it appeared that way, because I saw a bunch of dirt being kicked up. And so I was talking to one of my colleagues here at the museum who grew up in Greensboro in the 60s, and he's one I worked for, and I said, man, they used to play at War Memorial? He's like, yeah. He said it used to be packed too. And so he talked about how the community come out, the guys would come out to see the young ladies would come out, the fraternities would come out to showcase, and the sororities. But he said, one thing, he said, but you better be prepared to get dirty. Because you're going to be walking around kicking up all this dirt and stuff on your clothes. So I said, how does that set the atmosphere? Does that show the determination to go to the game? I'm still going to get dressed, even though I know I'm going to get dirty. But that's just part of the experience.
But Charles, you told me that story about the game. Somebody, I don't know if it was you, Dr. Johnson, but someone was telling me a story about the game. Because we interacted and talked to so many different people.
Right, absolutely.
But there was one of the more recent games, and I can't remember the exact game. But at the end of the day, A&T was visiting North Carolina Central to play, and I believe it was during the era of Air Harvey. And when they came over to play the game, I'm getting back to your question. When they came over to play the game, it was cold, it was wet. A&T practiced, and they were getting muddy and getting cold. Central didn't come out of the locker room. And the coach said at that time, we've got this game. We're going to win this game. And was that you, Charles?
No, it wasn't. That's a good story.
So we got this game. And I wish I could remember who told the story and the exact circumstances, but it was during the era of Air Harvey. And certainly, they defeated North Carolina Central. My point is, when you get about being dusty and getting dirty, I mean, the games they're going to get dirty. They're going to get down into the game, and if you show the lack of a desire to do that in that particular situation, which was a more recent, more modern game, that indicated to the coach and to the team, and he used it. The coach, talking about coaching again and the importance of coaching, the coach used it as an example to his team of how they had already won the game. They had because what they had sacrificed and what they were suffering out in the cold temperatures and in the damp and getting muddy to get ready for the game. That mentally they had the toughness and the fortitude to beat Central. And Central was really well that year. I wish I had the exact scores, but Central, it was one of the years that Central was really doing well.
And for our fans, when our teams are good, in particular,
right?
I mean, there's no weather or anything that's going to keep them away from their games, man. I mean, as Dr. Smallwood was saying earlier, people came from all over the state. The small towns would be empty, man, because people were trying to get here to see the game. It was, again, for much of the 20th century, that was the biggest event for African Americans in the state. Right? It was homecoming all over again for both schools.
All right, I'm gonna take my watch off so I can look at it, keep track of time. You all like to talk like I do, and so I'll lose track of time. So I want to make sure I'm close.
And I did want to add, just on that comment again, getting back to my father-in-law. My father-in-law played football in high school, and he said, his coach would tell him that if he really worked hard, he would help him get into North Carolina Central, and that's what he wanted to go. He wanted to play football for North Carolina Central. and he was committed. So my point is, in terms of recruiting, we talked earlier about, recruiting players and what did this game do, for recruiting players. And we already talked about Dudley and the fact that roughly half the student body would go to Central, half would go to A&T.
Right.
Same thing with Hillside. I mean, this was just kind of a pattern you would follow around the state. When it comes to black communities around the state, although there were other HBCUs, and like Winston-Salem State was very popular in Winston-Salem, I dare say that you had another set of black colleges that were, statewide in terms of people desiring to go to one of the other schools. And you can get back to reputations again. A&T really working with the farming communities and having agriculture extension offices all over the state, and in pretty much every county, they had a presence. And then when we get back to Central, and we talk about Shepherd and the folks who founded North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance, and the fact that they were the only insurance company that would insure black people, and they were all over the state. You understand, and those people were connected to North Carolina Central. They founded North Carolina Central. They were sending their kids to North Carolina Central. And so you have two schools that have a solid statewide presence, and they let you know, anybody who's associated with those schools let you know, I went to North Carolina Central, I went to North Carolina A&T, and so you had that really state rivalry.
And just real quick, building off of that, Smallwood, when I took the tour of A&T, the beautiful campus, the School of Business is named Ed Merrick, right? Hall, or whatever you call it. And his father was John Merrick, and John Merrick was the principal founder of North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. So, there's those ties again. Yeah, those ties.
But you talked about the fans' commitment to attend the game, the building of the rivalry. And so we know the tickets weren't free at any point, right? So they all paid. So what kind of financial impact? I heard a friend of mine talk about how he was talking anecdotally. He didn't have data in front of him, but he was saying how he believed that A&T they funded their athletic program off for 2 games, basically. It was A&T and Winston-Salem State, and that was every other year because they would trade. And then it was, 3, homecoming, and then the Aggie-Eagle Classic. And so talk about, Dr. Johnson, the financial impact of the Aggie-Eagle Classic for these schools such as Central and A&T.
Well, what I would say is that there's so many ways that you can look at that. Arwin and I didn't take off to try to drill down and come up with figures in that kind of way. But there's so many ways that the institutions pay off. We produce, A&T and engineering, as the number of black engineers that have come through, A&T and in the Department of History at North Carolina Central. We're like no other department in the state in terms of producing black scholars and so forth. So I guess what I'm kind of driving at is the payoff is in so many different ways. But speaking to the classics, it's really important to our athletic programs because we don't have the resources that we'd like to have. When I'm asked about HBCU football compared to PWI, or historically white institutions, that we're about to see going into, the bowl season and all, the difference is the budget, right? And that's the major difference. If we had Alabama's budget, we'd be glad to go out and play Alabama, right? So that would make all the difference. So those games, just as you have mentioned, are really important in driving revenue and helping to cover the costs for our athletic departments and so forth. But I want to make it clear it goes beyond just that. There's so many other ways it contributes to the state, and those players go on and do outstanding things.
That's an excellent point, and you pointed that out. And bringing up the fact that you need resources to build a program. Alan Hooker, famous quarterback from A&T, Hall of Fame, talked about that in the video more than just a game. He mentions how he saw a picture of a game where A&T had a helmet with the guard, and Central was playing with basically a leather hat. And he said, so money, it makes a difference. So in other words, he was trying to say, support your alma mater. And because we want to see A&T thrive. That's better for Central. We want to see North Carolina Central thrive. That's better for A&T.
Absolutely.
And so, use that to say, if you're watching, support the school. Support the programs.
Yes, very, very.
Before we get out of here, we got about 8 more minutes.
Sure.
And the last question, just to prepare it in your mind, what you think about the series. I'm not asking now, but just prepare in your mind when it moves to Charlotte next year at Bank of America Stadium. So I'm kind of implanting that in your head. But are there any particular, and I don't want to, I hate to ask this question because I'm going to leave a player out, but there are any particular moments or players that changed how you view the game? Mine would be watching Alan Hooker play, you know, and his passion for the game. He teared up when he did the video because he talked about how he never stepped foot on campus until he became an Aggie and how it just changed his life. You know, when I see him, that's all I see, A&T. And he went on to play pro. He didn't say about his pro career. He talked about how A&T changed his life. But so he was the player that changed the perception for me, for A&T. Is there any player or moment that changed the series for you or how you viewed it?
Yes, I can speak. So we did the same thing, right? I think, in fact, of the exhibit, the most compelling part are listening to the testimonials of the players and the coaches. I mean, it is something that who did it for me was a player who played at E.E. Smith in the early 60s, from 60 to 63.
Okay. My mother-in-law will be glad you mentioned E.E. Smith. That's our
Hey, look, man, outstanding drum majors, you know, and football players. Earl Ed Harvey is E.E. Smith.
Why do they have such
Doug Wilkerson, E.E. Smith. I mean, some really.
How do they produce drum majors like that? It's like
They're
drum major
intentional about it,
Oh,
man.
okay.
I think they're intentional about it. You start kind of a tradition, and you know you keep pushing that. But Connie Borgen was that player for me. Connie played running back and linebacker at North Carolina College in that 1960-63 period, and just like Alan Hooker, you know, he loved his teammates. That's what came out to me in talking about. He loved Kerman Riddick and playing with. They still talk like every day. He said, outside of my immediate family, you know, and like closest friends, these guys, that's my family. And just like Alan Hooker, you know, he teared up when he started talking about what they meant and the different lessons that he learned. And he could talk about, and we have to make sure that you all have that so Aggies can see this, because he talks about playing A&T and you all's great players, man, and what that looked like, and the kind of the sense of pride that both, because everybody knew everybody, you know, when they stepped out on the field. They gave it everything they had, you know, in those games. And again, I'm going to just emphasize, especially for that period, those guys really wanted everyone to know they were the best of the best players, and they really, really were. But yeah, you get that sense of, we started out talking about connections and how important that is, right? You know, and you really get that. And all of the players know each other. You know, for us, you mentioned great players. Doug Wilkerson, when I asked the Eagles, you know, and they don't really like to do this because there have been so many. Right. But Doug Wilkerson is one in that 60s period in particular. But he was just a phenomenal player, just like you had Elvin Bethea, Elvin Bethea. And those two actually ended up at Houston in the NFL and drove, I understand, to Houston together. You know, so.
Now we know Ernie Barnes is an artist.
Yeah.
How was he as a football player?
He was a very good football player, good enough to make it into the NFL. And you know, he Durham Hillside grew up as a Durhamite, grew up in the bottoms, and Ernie Barnes was a very good football player. Played in the 50s, I think 56 to 59 at North Carolina College. Yeah, but we know him from Sugar Shack, you know, the paintings and all that kind of thing. You know, good times and all that. Yeah.
Anybody for you, Dr. Smallwood?
Well,
Any moment, anyone?
Right, but mine's going to be a little different, and the moment stands out because when Dr. Johnson did their opening over in Durham at the museum, Eric Montgomery came, and he was a supporter of putting their exhibit together, financial supporter, and he was my classmate. We started North Carolina Central together, and we attended North Carolina Central. And the thing that struck me, he now owns a law firm in Charlotte, bringing Charlotte back into the mix. He owns a law firm in Charlotte. That he was just always a genuine person. I mean, I wasn't really into athletics that way in college or in high school. I couldn't play sports, you know, and had bad vision and couldn't play sports. But he was just always Eric Montgomery. He was just always who he was. He was just always himself, and just a good guy. And it's, to me, he represents the athletic program there well, in terms of him being not just a great athlete, but being a great scholar, who then goes on to go to law school and get his law degree and then found his own law practice. I mean, it's just, it speaks to the caliber of these athletes. And I think when you look at the films and you talk about the different players, that is their story, that this was their opportunity to go to college, their opportunity to succeed, and they took advantage of it, and it means the world to them. And the other thing is really an aside, is the actual stadium. When I came from North Carolina, from Eastern North Carolina to Central, the stadium is in the heart of the campus. So we walked down from Chipley Hall to the stadium on Saturdays for the home games. So it showed that was the heart of the community, right? That was the heart of it. And I always compare it with Ohio State, bringing back in the Ohio State experience. When I went to Ohio State, the football stadium was like in the heart of the community. And the sports program and the football program was just a major part of that campus. And I felt at home. I felt a kinship to what I had experienced my 4, 5, 6 years, because I got my master's at Central as well. But my time at North Carolina Central, I saw that same connection, that same camaraderie. And then when going back to the Ohio State connection again, Helen Edmonds, who had finished Ohio State, in the 30s, and sent a lot of her students to Ohio State, Early Thorpe and others. I mean, there was not a bigger fan of North Carolina Central than Helen Edmonds, and she would point out to everyone all the time, the Eagle is not any ordinary barnyard fowl. That we are exceptional, and you are to be exceptional. And from the time she got to Central onward, the Helen Edmonds building, now named for her, where Dr. Johnson goes to work every day, she sent numerous scholars out, started that tradition of producing so many great African American scholars in history and people who went on to law school. I believe one of her students was the former Chancellor
Julius Chambers. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Back to Charlotte again.
Yeah, back to Charlotte.
Taking us right back there.
Yeah.
I heard his name a lot. I went to a fellow Aggie, Justice Henry Friday. They did a cinematography project, and they unveiled it this past Saturday, and his name came up quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
Julius Chambers, as well as some others, some fellow Catholics too.
Oh, okay.
So my last question, we'll get out of here on this, is what are your, you don't have to do a deep dive, but your initial thoughts, what's your reaction to the Aggie-Eagle Classic now being moved to Charlotte in 2000? I'm not sure how long the contract is, but it begins in 2022. So it's no longer a home and home. It's not always been. We played at Carter Finley Stadium after 1990. But, Dr. Johnson, I'll start with you. What is your reaction about what do you think the tournament's going to grow?
Well, I understand it. Again, it's now even bigger than just statewide, right? Because people travel to come to these games, and our alumni all over the country, all over the world, truthfully. So they travel to come here. So we understand that. But for me, so I understand it. But for me, I think it's something when you play at home and you play. I get it's a revenue thing when you're playing in those stadiums. But for the kids, it is like Dr. Smallwood was just saying. It's right in the heart of the campus at North Carolina Central, and all of the kids come and the locals and everything, and it makes it really special when it's that way. But I understand it, and it will be great, and it'll be a lot of fun and all of that kind of thing in Charlotte. But it's different when it's especially because that's a really large stadium. So it's kind of spread out as compared to when we kind of all on top of each other and all that.
And I'm thinking how it looks
more intimate.
When we look at it on TV, how's it gonna look? And then you can't show off your outfit.
Right.
The Qs can't find a spot to step somewhere where everybody can see. I'm sure they'll find a place. But it's just, I understand the intimacy is a little lost. But and what about you, Dr. Smallwood?
Well, again, it'll be along the same lines that it's understood. But as Dr. Johnson has just pointed out, Atlanta. If we talk about the places where A&T and Central have huge alumni bases, Atlanta being one of them. Obviously, it gives people more access coming up from Atlanta, and then with the airports, it gives people the chance to fly in. We have people, in D.C. and all over. Not to belabor this and draw it out. One of the things I learned at Central was how our alumni network, and it gets back to the history of this game, the history of these schools, that you have to remember because of Jim Crow and segregation, just bringing everything back to a point. we produced so many outstanding people, but they couldn't stay in the state. They couldn't get quality jobs in the state. So historically, we've always had to send our people out to the Midwest and to the Northeast to get jobs in other cities, and they've prospered and they've done well.
Right.
And so that's still the pattern. They send their children back to A&T, and they send their children back to Central. And if we lifted the caps, we would even have more students from out of state, because so many of our alums were forced to go out of state, to get jobs. So coming away from your point, I agree with Dr. Johnson that it takes away from the intimacy, it takes away from, both groups being on each other's campuses and in that home field advantage, and it really kind of splits it. It evens the playing field, I would think, in the sense that when people are there in Charlotte, it's going to be, probably a greater equalizer in terms of the crowd, and when we go to those games. But we understand, we both do the economics behind it and what's at play there.
And it'll be great, just like we said.
Right.
I mean, it'll be a lot of fun.
We'll adapt.
Yeah.
So we've reached the end of our time, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to take 60 seconds and say some final things, if you have anything to say about the future of the Classic in the two schools, not just football, but the programs itself.
Well, I think we're both doing really well. Both institutions are doing really well. When Dr. Smallwood approached me about doing this was his idea. It was a no-brainer to do it. We wanted to honor both institutions. We wanted to honor the players and the coaches and the alumni and so forth from both institutions. And it really is so much more than just a game, right? And really appreciative of this opportunity to come up here and to share what I know, and to invite the Aggies down to Durham to the Museum of Durham History. You all are represented there well, in that exhibit. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, and I'm gonna make a trip down in the next week, 2 weekends.
Give me a call, and I'll come over with you, and we can talk through it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Smallwood.
Well, again, it's the same. It's been an honor and a privilege to just be affiliated with Dr. Johnson. I mean, we had a chance to meet each other early in my career here at A&T, and he's just an outstanding person. And the opportunity to interact and work on projects such as this have just been, this has been the high point of my career. And when we talk about, the game and the meaning of the game, you're not going to find anybody more passionate about, Central and A&T. I tell people the story all the time. If it wasn't for North Carolina Central, when I applied for college, A&T turned me down, along with everybody else in the state. Only North Carolina Central accepted me and gave me an opportunity to do whatever I had done. It's because of that foundation. But I have treated A&T, and the Aggies have treated me like family. And I have done for A&T what I would do, for my alma mater or for any other, school that I worked at. So I have given A&T it all, given all to it.
And you've done a fine job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Coming from an Aggie, so.
But, we appreciated the opportunity as well. We've always looked, my director kind of charged us with reaching out to the community, doing more outreach and getting stories that may be underrepresented or marginalized or whatever the case may be. And so it's an opportunity for us to do this. And Glenn Perkins, he handles our community voices display. And so it was just a natural fit. And like I said, we want to build on this, and so many different conversations we can have that we need to just kind of put all of it in one big box and just as a resource for everybody to use in classrooms or just to learn about the rivalry. So I appreciate you offering your content and your expertise and your knowledge of history that you bring to this. And I invite people to come to the Greensboro History Museum, 130 Summit Avenue in Greensboro. We're 10 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday. Sunday we're 2 to 5, closed on Mondays. But come check out the display and just learn about this rivalry and learn about these two institutions. And so it's just been an honor learning about all these players, from Willie Pearson, and Mohammed has just all the different players, Dexter Feaster, and all the players coming from Central and the coaches. Just a wonderful program. And so thank you for contributing to this.
And if I didn't do this, I want to thank you too. Thank you for this opportunity and for us being here and the work that you put into helping to get the exhibit here in Greensboro set up. I want to thank you and the folks that you mentioned, Ms. Hafe and James Stewart, for the work that they've done. So I did want to make sure I said that too. This has been a great opportunity for us to sit and talk about this, and hopefully people will come out and see the display and see the images that are there.
Definitely a team effort, right?
Absolutely. And Spencer Gwynn, who's 89, who, like I said, called the games. He was just delighted that we were doing this. And so, but thank you. This has been our program here at the Greensboro History Museum, the Aggie-Eagle Classic, the history of the Aggie-Eagle Classic. And as you've heard from our discussion, it's more than just a game.